Smile and welcome to quite possibly the biggest review of the year. Quite literally, because we are taking a look at the Tank 2, one of the largest and most insane smartphones that we've ever seen. It comes from a brand new brand, 8849, which is a spin-off from Unihertz, who we've covered many a time on this channel in the past. This phone is utterly insane. It not only weighs more than a pound, but it's got a 15,500 milliamp battery, it's got a 108 megapixel camera, it's got 2 camp lights, and it's even got a projector. This phone seemingly has it all, but is it any good? Let's find out. But before we do, please be sure to like the video and subscribe if you want to show your support to the channel, and also comment below if you've got any questions about the Tank 2, because I'm sure you will have plenty. So the Tank 2, why does it exist? Well, some of you guys might remember my review of the original Unihertz Tank last year, and this was one of the most unusual phones that I had ever tested. Well, I did love the rugged design and the insane battery life with the 22,000 milliamp battery. It wasn't exactly perfect. Firstly, it was ridiculously heavy at over half a kilogram in weight. The cameras were pretty mediocre and the performance wasn't all that brilliant. But despite that, it was the most fun I had with the phone for that entire year. I just loved how quirky it was, and people would constantly stop me to ask about what it was. And this year for the sequel, Unihertz has spun the Tank brand off into the 8849 brand, because it does make sense that the company making the Jelly phones probably shouldn't be the same company that's making the Tank phones, because these very much exist on the opposite side of the hardware spectrum. It's absolutely ridiculous. But if we put the Tank phones side by side though, well, they are very similar with their extremely tough metal and rubber construction. You will eventually start to notice some hardware differences. While the bodies are very similar, the newer phone is actually very slightly slimmer. But honestly, before I put them side by side a little bit like this, I didn't even notice that. The trade-off though is a smaller battery. The battery has gone from a gargantuan 22,000 milliamps to a still ridiculous 15,500 milliamps. While the battery life is noticeably worse than the original, it's still many factors more than your average phone. On the front, we have a pair of very similar looking 6.8-inch Full HD LCD displays, and while they aren't the best displays in the world, they aren't that bright in direct sunlight, the colors do look a little bit odd, and the blacks just aren't very dark. They are at least both very sharp displays. There are some differences though. On the original phone, the camera cutout is in the corner, and now that's been moved to the middle for some reason. And more importantly though, the new display is now 120 Hz. But due to a weird technical limitation of the next feature, it's not a feature that's been enabled. Yet despite the display being 120 Hz on the new phone, it's just limited to a very lackluster 60. And that's because on the top of this phone there is a projector. Yep, the projector phone is back, baby. Last time we saw a projector was on the Galaxy Beam phone from over 10 years ago. And while this projector was absolutely terrible at 58 lumens, the new projector on the Tank is way better. Firstly, it's a laser projector, which means that it's very bright. In fact, it can project up to 40 lumens in brightness and has a resolution of 720p, which is actually really good numbers for a Pico projector this small. To enable it, all you have to do is go into settings, or I've made a shortcut for myself. I just swipe down and instantly I've got a projector. And just notice that typo over there. This is a prototype device, but it's pretty funny nonetheless. Well, it's a little bit fuzzy, and this is considerably better than the units on the Galaxy Beam, and it's actually bright enough to be useful. For example, we haven't even turned off all of our lights yet, and it's still more than bright enough. I can totally imagine showing off a PowerPoint presentation in a darkened room with this at a pinch, or even watching a movie, because the speaker is actually surprisingly loud on this phone. This is great, and it's so much better than the IR blaster that it replaces on the old phone. Also, if you're worried about battery life, don't be, because 8849 says that the battery still lasts 12 hours. 12 hours with the projector on. On the Galaxy Beam, if I recall, it had I don't know, half an hour of battery life with the projector. But this sort of makes me wish even more that there was a kickstand on this phone, because either you're going to be holding up the phone for 12 hours, which is not great when it weighs over a pound, but I've just been finding myself using odd objects like, I don't know, another Unihertz phone to put it on the right angle, which is a little bit ridiculous, to be fair. As great as the projector is though, it's the reason why I've been told that the 120Hz screen has not been implemented, because there's an intrinsic incompatibility between the 120Hz screen and the projector. So because of this feature, we're just limited to an ordinary 60Hz, unfortunately. But apparently they are working on finding a fix, but don't count on it before release. If we look on the sides of the phone, we can see that some of the buttons have been moved. On the right side, we've still got the fingerprint reader / power button that works fairly well, and we've also got the SIM card eject tray. Now this is really great to have, because not only can you just remove it with your fingernail, which is so refreshing for us phone reviewers, and when we take it out, not only do we see that there's space for 2 SIM card slots, but there's also space for a memory card slot, a micro SD card, for the first time ever, so that's really good to have. Although with 256 gigabytes of storage, it's a little bit unnecessary, but it's still cool to have. On the left side of the phone, we've got the volume keys, and we've also got the shortcut buttons, both of them over here. I've set the keys to control the camp lights that we'll talk about later, and the bottom one I use for screenshots and also screen recordings, which is just very useful. You can just take a screenshot just like that. And while we're here, let me just tell you that the build quality is just insane. The metal and rubber finishes just feel so solid, and there's nothing to complain on that front at all. It's just an incredibly solid feeling phone. And the back of the phone is where the insanely cool bit is, because on the original phone, the most insane feature was the 1200 lumen camp light, which was just ridiculous. It was so bright that I could literally blind people with it. I mean, just look at this. I mean, look at that. That is just insane. On the new one, obviously, they've doubled it. As you can see, now you've got both a daylight and also a tungsten light, and you can have both on the same time as well. So let's try that out. So either you can hold down your shortcut button over here like I did on the old phone, or you could go into the Unihertz app called Toolbox, and in there you'll find something called camping light, and it's so bright that it literally gives you a warning. So over here, not only can we choose which lights do we want cold and warm, let's have both, but you can also adjust the brightness. Let's go with full bright, and oh my god, just look at that. That is absolutely insane. You could definitely use this light as something that you can film with, although you have to squint a lot, or you could use it as a flash while taking photos, or I guess you could even use it as a camp light, as the name implies. Again, with a battery this large, you just don't have to worry about chewing through up the battery. But I do wish that you could program the phone to use the camp light to take photos, because at the moment you do have to use it manually. And if we turn it off, I think you might find this hilarious. By default in the camera app, this is the default flash. Yikes, that's not quite the same, is it? It's a little bit hilarious. And also the camp lights are so bright that if you want the maximum brightness, you can only do that once every 10 minutes, otherwise it just gets too hot. And that's not the only thing that they added, because this next feature honestly had me shook. Because if you look in this app over here, it's called warning lights. And if we turn it on, yep, they're police lights, which would work fantastically if you need some cop lights when you're shooting a short film, let's say. But the interface in the Toolbox app where you use it does look a little bit childish. You can turn it on or off like so. You've got this hilarious looking cop car over here, and you can choose the background noise. As you can see, there's a lot of choices. For example, you can have Police Siren 1, which sounds like this. Now that's scary. Or you could have Air Raid Siren 2. Let's hear what that sounds like. While I would love to be able to keep either the blue or the red lights on, as it could provide quite a cool look, this police light look is the only look that you can have with these two lights. And my biggest problem with this feature is that I think that it might be illegal, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the easiest ways to get some time by imitating a police officer. So while this is quite a cool feature, it is quite an odd addition indeed. Also a little bit confusing is the location of the speaker over here, which was one of my biggest problems with the original phone. As you can see on the old phone, it was down here, so it was very easy to cover, and now they've just moved it just up a little bit. It's still on the back of the phone, so it sounds weird when you're resting it on a table, and it's also just still way too easy to block. I mean, come on guys, there's so much bezel space on the front. You could most definitely have had both a left and right front firing speaker. Also on the back of the phone we have the cameras, which have changed somewhat. If we compare them, we have what I believe, although I might be wrong, the same 108 megapixel main unit, which has been improved by software, I assume. And also thank God they've ditched the quite frankly useless 2 megapixel macro camera on the old phone, and they've replaced it with a far more useful ultra wide that's 16 megapixels. It's not great, but at least it's there. What is really great though is the upgraded night vision camera that's now 64 instead of 20 megapixels, and we can also see that the IR blasters have been doubled. So I'm sure in combination with the better sensor, that accounts for the images that look way clearer than before. And finally, let's have a look on the bottom of the phone where there's a mystery flap. Now I wonder what's behind it. Firstly, not only do we have a USB-C port, but we also have a headphone jack. Last time I did make a little bit of a fuss that you can use the USB-C port to charge other devices, which sounds very impressive, but I tried it properly recently, and it did disappoint me a little bit because I plugged my iPhone in for roughly half an hour and it charged, wait for it, 3%. 3% in half an hour. So it's not exactly great, but at least the feature is there. And also it's a little bit annoying having to open this every time you want to charge your phone. And I would prefer if there was some sort of wireless charging. It would be extremely slow, but wireless charging would still be nice. So in all, the hardware is just as insane as last year's version, but with some even more insane additions. But what is the phone like to use? Now I'm afraid to say that it's largely the same. Firstly, we have upgraded to Android 13 from the previous Android 12, so you get all of the new features and all that. But I have noticed that the old model is still waiting for an upgrade, and it doesn't exactly seem to be coming at this point, so that's definitely a little bit disappointing. What's also disappointing is the processor. It's the same MediaTek Helio G99 as the predecessor, and it's not exactly the fastest chip in the world. While it can play games like Civilization 6 and Subway Surfers with aplomb, as the graphics are actually pretty good, the processor just is not that great. So I'm just going to start another Geekbench 6 benchmark, and you can just see how slow it does it. It just literally takes forever, but the last time I did it, it got a single core score of 722 and a multi-score of 1967. Now those will be impressive figures in 2017, but these scores today just don't exactly impress. With 2 high performance and 6 low performance cores, it's efficient though, but just not a particularly performative processor. While it does run Android okay, I mean, I'm never left waiting for anything in particular, the scrolling just is not the smoothest thing in the world, especially without the 120Hz. And if you do want to take advantage of the improved 12GB of RAM and you want to do some split screen multitasking, then the performance does really begin to chug, although this is a particularly easy example. It's just a photo in a Google. So the performance is not the end of the world, but this phone would have been amazing with the newer chip like a Dimensity 9000 Plus that I recently tested on the Oppo N2 Flip, or even a newer Snapdragon processor like the Series 8 Gen 1 that I tried on the Think phone recently. It's not awful, but the performance definitely is not a reason to buy this phone. And now let's talk about the cameras. Now this was a real weak spot of the original phone. For some reason the 108 megapixel camera exists exhibited some really weird artifacts that have been fixed with the software update. But at the beginning, when you zoomed in, you could see some weird polka dotting, which I still don't know what they are, but I did say that it was probably had something to do with the Bayer filter or something, but I really have no idea what I'm talking about here. But after the update and also on the new phone, that problem has luckily been solved. And the 108 megapixel photos actually look alright. There's plenty of detail there. I've tested the camera in both low light and also brighter conditions, and honestly it performs fairly well. But what's less impressive though are the colors, because oh my god, the Jpeg processing is just dire. Colors are just so oversaturated and have so much contrast that it verges on disgusting. It's so bad that I would honestly just attribute this to the pre-production model. It just has to be, because it's not on the old phone, and luckily though it should be easily patched, and the raw images actually do look pretty decent, so just make sure that you take photos in raw. One small thing though was that the camera app is quite misleading, because there is something called portrait mode. It's not an actual portrait mode though, because it just introduces skin smoothing. And from what I can tell, the changing the aperture does literally nothing whatsoever. So I just think that's a little bit hilarious. The video still tops out at 2K resolution, which still is quite disappointing, and it genuinely looks quite awful if you leave it on its default settings. It's just so shaky and nasty. But if you manually turn on the EIS, which is the stabilization, as it's off for some reason by default, it actually does look quite decent. So be sure to do that. The wide camera, like with most smartphone wide cameras, is fairly mediocre, but it does work well enough. And also the night vision camera, as we've talked about before, is very fun to use, albeit quite useless for most people. I'm sure that some people who like to sneak out in the middle of the night, take photos of easily scared objects would love it though, because it does work in a very lovely way. And now finally, let's talk about battery life. Well, it's not quite as good as the original, it's still pretty insane. On the original, I could quite easily get a week's worth of battery life, while with this, it's closer to maybe 5 days of heavy-ish usage. But considering that my iPhone barely lasts an entire day, with that much use, it's quite incredible that I can get, you know, multiple days on just the one battery on this phone. And the fact that you can use features like the camp light and the projector with reckless abandon, honestly, is quite refreshing. I remember starting a day with 20%, and that would basically be impossible with an iPhone. But with this, I knew that, you know, that's more than a day's worth of battery, so there were no problems there at all. So should you buy the Tank 2? Well, firstly, it's not cheap. At over $900 on Alibaba, it definitely is reaching into premium territory, but no phone can do what this phone does. It's got a set of features and strengths so unique and so compelling that if you are the right target market for this phone, no other device will do, apart from maybe the original version. For what other phone can last up to a week of mild use, has a built-in projector, has a night vision camera, 2 1200 lumen camp lights, and also a headphone jack. I mean, yes, the processor and the cameras are not great, but that's a compromise that many fans of this phone, I'm sure, will be able to work with. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure that you've liked and subscribed, and on that note, toodaloo.